All right, so I'm here with Joe Manoles, and Joe, I'm excited to dive into this topic. What are we talking about today? What's our episode discussion for?
Yeah, we're here to talk about motor learning and motor control.
All right, and how it relates to climbing, obviously.
Yes. hmm
And you put together this article for those of you that are watching. You'll have a couple visuals from the article. And those of you who are listening, I wouldn't worry too much about it. You can just in the show notes grab a download of a table or a couple of descriptions of terms. This is a fascinating article, but it reads like an article. And what
Mm.
we're going to try to do is bring it to life in a podcast with practical, real examples related to climbing. But before we even do that, I think we do have to get down and dirty with the terms, right? Understanding some key terminology. And everyone listening and watching, bear with us for about what, like 2-3 minutes as we
Yeah, if
check
that.
off these terms, and then we'll get into the fun stuff. But yeah, break down what terms we should be familiar with so that we can start talking about climbing and application to motor control.
For sure. Yeah. I guess I'll just go through the few general terms of motor control, motor learning, as so we have just some descriptive tools we can use as we apply this further, because it's always helpful to have language that everybody understands. So let me break those down for you. I'll actually share that with you so you can read along. Here it is.
All right. And yeah, those of you that are viewing, you'll see a couple of these terms on the screen. Those of you that are listening, don't worry about it. Joe's about to tell us exactly what's going on.
Yeah, I'll be reading word for word. All right. From my article, it says motor control is defined as the ability to regulate or direct mechanisms essential to movement. So that's a mouthful. Reading a little further, it's quite simply your voluntary control of your body during a task. So it's like reaching for a cup of coffee on your table, or a glass of water, or whatever that might be. And difference in that is motor performance is the transient ability to control your body for a desired action. So it's like successfully making a hard dead point, or even several times within a session. And then finally, motor learning, what we're getting to. So we have motor control, motor performance, and now motor learning is the acquisition or modification of movement. And so motor learning offers an important difference between itself and motor performance, meaning that it actually implies a more permanent change to the way we like actually accomplish a specific action or movement. So it's like coming back after a couple weeks and making that same hard dead point move, or whatever that type of skill might be that you're interested in. And
Got
so
it.
that's kind of yeah.
So motor control, grabbing the coffee. What's a motor control example for climbing? I mean, I guess you're grabbing your coffee before you get to the gym, but is there any like
Mhm.
low level motor control component for climbing itself?
Yeah, for sure. Reaching to grab a hold. I mean, as simple as reaching to grasp the next hold, or pushing off of a foot, or pulling onto a move. As arbitrary as that. So it's quite literally the way you direct your skeleton in the world.
I gotcha. So we have motor control, motor performance, and motor learning. So we've got those terms like locked in the brain because we're gonna be
hmm
utilizing them in context. Any other terms that we should be dialed in with?
I feel like for the most part, those are helpful in understanding like the stages of how we require how we just grown to understand movement, I suppose. Like I by no means are the first person to talk about motor control, motor learning. It's been well studied through a variety of sports, not in climbing as much. There's a few folks that have done a lot of good work, but I think understanding these three terms is most important. As you can see, for those like looking at this and those listening, you can check it on the article. There's different stages defined below that outline kind of where a learner will be on this stage as they grow. So the first stage is defined as the cognitive stage, or when they're first beginning to understand the task that's at hand. How do I latch this hold? How do I hold tension with this heel hook, while reaching. Now I'm freeing my hand and reaching. How do I coordinate that? How am I going to go about doing that? That's a cognitive stage learner. And the associative stage is that middle section. And I'll use a graph with this. I think it's helpful. Associative stage is that middle section where you're really refining your movement and saying, okay, this is how much tension I need to hold on that heel hook, or this is how much force I'm going to need to squeeze on this sloper in order to stay on. And so that's like that middle section where you're refining your movement. Working out beta is a good way to kind of define that section. And then the autonomous stage, that last section, is like the highest form of learning. And that's like the automatic movements. Like I don't need to think about how much I need to reach out my hand, how much like degrees of elbow flexion I need to have to grab the coffee cup on my table. It's just something my body knows how to do. Like I can grab my cup and can take a drink. So those are kind of some few terms I feel like are helpful to begin with. And we can
Got it.
obviously
And before, yeah, and before you move on from those, just to
Mhm.
dial these in as well, we have cognitive, associative, and autonomous.
Mhm.
And you're relating us all to climbing. You also have a visual pictorial of like how much attention you need for each.
Mhm.
But basically, cognitive in a nutshell, break it down one more time for everyone so they lock it in their head.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll read that out for you. So cognitive, the learner is concerned with understanding the nature of the task. So they're developing strategies they can use to carry out the task, and they're really trying to figure out like how do I accomplish this thing in front of me, whatever that movement task is.
How
And
do I
then
climb this boulder problem? I just can't figure it out.
yeah,
Associative, yeah.
yeah, cognitive, you would come up to the bouldering problem. You're like, how do I work these moves? Associative being like, okay, I know how it feels like to be on the wall in those moves. How do I make this better? How do I refine this movement? How do I stay on the wall longer? Maybe, even in that case, I'm falling off in this crux sequence. How do I do that? And then finally, autonomous stage is like, oh, I can go and day flash this problem. It's I have a breadth and depth of skills I can bring to this problem, and I can apply them in real action here.
All right, sounds good. And I'm sure
Mhm.
the level of attention as you kind of have with that graph is it takes a ton of attention. Like cognitive phase, you're like trying to figure out the problem or what to do. Associative, maybe just the beta you're sussing out, and then autonomous, yeah, you're just cruising it. You already have that dialed in, and things are looking good. So you need less attention, in those later stages. And that's like a very classic kind of graph or orientation.
Mhm. I think a lot of folks, if you've ever heard of motor control, motor learning, and heard these phrases at all, or heard this in psychology even, I'm sure you've seen this graph shared. It's pretty classic.
All right, so we've got motor control, motor performance, motor learning. We've got
Mhm.
cognitive, associative, and autonomous. Is there any other terms that we need to jump into?
I'm afraid there are, but we can kind of cross that bridge when we get there. I guess I'll just briefly define them as types of practice. And so there's types of practice and types of feedback, and that's kind of the details that my article goes into. And believe it or not, there's even more. There's more on motor control, motor learning, and more terms to get nerdy on. But yeah, so briefly, types of practice are essentially ways to organize your learning. So think of it as ways to organize your session. What kind of routes are we working on? What kind of moves are we gonna be doing in this session? And it's kind of like practice. It's like your purpose for that time to practice whatever the task is you're doing. And then the other thing I want to bring up is feedback, which is a tool that our body and coaches and yourself can use to get feedback on what's happened or what's happening during your task. And so that's kind of like a loose definition, and we can chat more about it if we want to get into the weeds of certain examples, because I think it's helpful. Um, but yeah, types of feedback and types of practice are important things to consider too going forward.
Yeah, and I think for any climbers, these are really like your building blocks, right? All these
Mhm.
terms that we're discussing. And the more that you know about them, the more you understand about them, the more cognizant you are with one, your climbing, but also probably your training as well. So, Joe, how do we have fun with this? How do we take something
Mhm.
that is very academic and apply this to people listening who are climbing that want to learn how to climb better, train better, make better decisions?
Yeah, I think the thing I keep on coming back to over and over again is that like everybody is an individual, and so everyone has their own required needs and strengths when it comes to like learning how to do a movement, regardless of what that movement is. And so I think trying to find out where areas of your own technique breakdown could be helpful. I think areas where you seem to there's like a type of move on a route, or there's a sequence of moves on a route that's a certain style that you don't like, or your body never seems to get, whatever. I think identifying those areas are helpful, and then going into like detail, how can we actually like how can one get better at this? In my article, I talk about someone learning how to do a heel hook, and that's a very like I feel like a moderate level climber kind of ability. It's like, okay, if I can heel hook, at least the folks that do use heels correctly instead of just like placing an ankle on the wall, because I've seen that heel hook and I've done
It
that
looks
heel hook
cool.
myself.
Yeah.
It looks cool. You just plop it up there, and you're good to go. I think that would make it more interesting for folks though too, is like saying, hey, like how is my own learning impacted by this organization of thought, this
Okay.
organization of motor learning, motor control, like how as an individual, what do I need? What are the tools that I need? And so we can talk about those too, like tools one can use to actually refine what they're doing movement wise on the wall. Um,
Well, I have a
yeah.
challenge then. I have a challenge.
hmm
So let's take one of my challenges. Let's see if you can find ways to optimize my motor control, motor learning for a task that I am not excited about with climbing and not very good at for that reason. Is that
hmm
and then maybe we take one of yours
Sure.
and we apply it. So you ready for the task?
Sure. Yeah.
Some people love this type of hold and movement. Some people hate it. I despise slopers. I suck at
Oh,
them. I don't really enjoy them. My motor control patterns, like I see a sloper and I'm like, and I kind of like adjust my body around it.
sure.
So how can we use some of these philosophies for me to maybe train, utilizing slopers more often, and then
hmm
integrate that within my repertoire? There's your
Yeah.
challenge.
Cool. Yeah. No, those are great. So when you have someone in front of you with an actual like skill they want to learn, it becomes like the whole, it's almost like color and art. It's like everything comes to life. You're like, oh yeah, here's like 800 examples of things we can begin to work on in order to like make you better at this single movement. So there's obviously follow-up questions because I'm a stickler on those, but like what's your, if I was gonna help this learner, it's like what's your experience on slopers? Is it like
My
you're a novice in
experience
them?
my experience
Yeah.
is I'm in the cognitive stage. I'm
Yeah.
literally like, I am concerned about this hold. Let me choose a different route. So I'm in the cognitive stage. My experience with slopers is quite low because I completely avoid them. Well, not completely, but I try to avoid them as best as possible.
hmm
And I think for you to using the terms, my motor performance and motor learning is also very low because of lack of exposure. Is that a fair
Uh,
fair assessment?
That's great. That was a good use of terms too. I'm really proud. That's a good a good utilization of them. It makes sense. Yeah. So if you so for a cognitive person that is learning how to get more coordinated on slopers, it's like kind of like taking your medicine. It's like getting in the gym and getting on those hold types, but with like I would say with good feet and variable feet, so that like you can actually have some success at it because it seems like you were robbed of your early success.
Oh, robbed heavily.
robbed
Yeah.
robbed heavily of your early success on slopers,
So I need some
which is actually
victories. I need some
I think
W's, some wins
I
in the
think
win
I think
column.
you've seen some wins for your body to, because you are a good climber like in your own right, like you know how to, you're coordinated in other ways on the
I love
wall.
how you're like, in your own right, but on slopers you're not very good. Yeah.
Hey, PTs are so good at using colorful language, to paint the right picture, and paint in a positive light, because like everyone's on a journey of movement discovery, right? But to use your case that you've given, I think getting success on something, especially if all you have in your memory is like, I hate these holds, all I do is slip on them. I think getting success and actually finding where that point of like actual friction is, that friction potential, because people get on them, they touch them, they're like, no way. But I think if they played with your body positioning, because a lot of slopers, like ironically, it's a mostly coordination. It's not even strength. It's like people aren't, I mean, power for sure, power endurance, especially if you're slapping, holding compression. But if you take a sloper and you slap it on the wall, people aren't like gripping super hard to get on to like pull up on a sloper. Like, people are typically like hanging and are really putting not that much amount of force through that hold. So I think having success on it would be my beginning point with you. If I was going to take you have a session, I'd be like, okay, let's get you successful on these and see like if you are just like not that strong enough or to have the, connective tissue to hold there, or are you actually just needing coordination and cueing in that position. So yeah,
All right. Well,
take a cognitive.
let's say that I have the strength. I'm just avoiding them, and now I'm like,
Mhm.
okay, we go into the climbing gym because that's probably the most amount of slopers to choose, and you take me on a bunch of different problems. I can rainbow my feet. I'm like, all right, I'm getting this sloper thing. I'm getting it. Here's my next question: how do I practice it? Like, how do
Mhm.
I utilize, you know, random versus blocked, whole versus part, guided versus discovery, error versus errorless? Like, how would you recommend? And you may have to ask me some additional questioning, but how
Mhm.
can I now practice utilizing slopers since it's something I obviously avoided in the past?
Yeah, I mean, as simple as block practice. So block practice is one of the types of practices that there are many of, and a lot of them are redundant. But the blocked practice of practicing actually um, latching and holding and then moving off of a sloper, I think could be helpful. Even I would say even just moving off the sloper to get to the next hold, especially if it's kind of more of a powerful move, is pretty hard to coordinate. And that one would be worth, I think, going down and seeing how well, first observing and seeing how you do that. So probably getting you in a scenario, we can do some block practice with it. And once you have it down, um, another type of practice would be getting you on just a bunch of sloper problems that require you using slopers and being like, okay, now you have some wherewithal how to get coordinated on this hold. Let's put you on a variety of these problems and see how you perform. And that's kind of like it can be kind of a form of self discovery, practice, which is like the learner actually just, figuring it out by themselves. Although it's not kind of like a misnomer because typically that term applies to folks that are brand new to the activity. So that'd be like it's putting you in the gym. You haven't seen a sloper in your life, and you're like, "All right, here's a bunch of problems we're going to do today," and they're all slopers, and you're like, "Why did I hate that session?" Um, that's kind of that'd be an example of what we could do with practice, at least with
So
you
if we were
as someone in
to,
the middle.
yeah, and if we were to kind of like hodgepodge these terms, so we have like randomized practice and block practice, and
Mhm.
thinking for me to start with some block practice of just like doing a bunch of slopers in a row versus random. How would random be? Like you spin a wheel and you're like, all right, every fourth problem, now every seventh problem, you do a sloper.
Yeah, it
But
could be.
sorry, yeah, how would random actually look like? Would someone
Yeah,
have to
spray.
randomize it for me?
Yeah, you could. So spray walls are really nice because they are pretty random, and you can say like, "Hey, I want you to use three slopers in this movement. I want you to go from left to right up this wall," and then you have to just figure out how you're gonna get up there with your own body. And folks that are kind of depends on the learner completely, but if folks that have this preference, and you can do subjective interviews for that, or folks that say like, "Hey, no, I like to learn this way," they will do better with their retention, with their accuracy, with their motor performance or motor learning, I should say, later on coming back to that same skill or that hold type or that wall type. Even it'd be like if those folks can choose how they receive that feedback, then they're going to be much more successful at getting that skill or utilizing slopers up that spray wall, or in
And what
future
type of
sessions of
feedback?
slopers.
Like like what are the types of feedback that someone would choose?
Yeah, for sure. So kind of going back into types of feedback, one that I'm really passionate about that's kind of cool is internal. Internal feedback is all of the wires, nuts, and bolts that make up our nervous system. They're in our tendons, they're in our muscles, they're in our ligaments, they're in our skin. They're these little sensory cellular little cellular, we call them tools, machinery to sense little tiny movements, force, stretch, pressure, all these cool sensations that make up our own body's understanding of what we're doing in space. Since your body is constantly capturing data all the time of whatever you're doing, and it's remarkable. And so when you're on a wall and you're slapping to a hold, your body's saying, "Oh yeah, I felt that rock on my skin when it slapped. I felt like how much pressure I needed to apply here." And next time you go and slap that hold, you're gonna have that same memory, if you want to call it, which I kind of like to use memory to describe it, because memory is kind of like the earliest form of memory. So anywho's, you have this internal feedback that's really helpful. Your body's literally capturing data for you all day for free. So that's helpful. And then the external feedback, which is very much what we're used to using in the gym, like video, um, or someone shouting
Coaching.
at you on the wall, coaching.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's like,
Right foot up, right foot up, left
exactly
foot shut
100%.
up. Trying to suss my own
Exactly.
beta. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Just spraying someone down at the gym. That's a concurrent form of feedback. So it's like
I
while they're
love, by the
doing
way, I love in the article how you put a coach with permission
permission.
could offer beta for external cues.
Yeah,
All right, so we have
gotta include it.
internal. Oh yeah, so go for it. Go for it.
No, I just think I had to include that. It's like it's important because it's a part of research. It's well researched that folks that decide when they get feedback, especially if they like getting feedback at a certain time, they have a choice in that. They're gonna retain more skills. They're gonna have better accuracy in their skills, and more success in overall learning, if you want to call it that.
Yeah, dude,
So yeah.
I hate like feedback from people. I'm like, I need to figure this out myself. But there is some level of like, because you mentioned so many different forms of feedback, right? As you're talking now,
Mhm.
you have internal, versus external, and there's other forms. And I like how you say, at least initially, it's nice to link the preference of the climber to the feedback that they're receiving.
Mhm.
But I do have to imagine at some point you have to like get feedback that you don't prefer, to break through a plateau. Like if there's a method that you're always watching beta videos of yourself, maybe, using some internal feedback and really feeling how that hold feels, as you mentioned, on your skin may actually be a nice like supplement to it. So I have to imagine there's this interplay between what you
Mhm.
want and maybe what you should have as well.
Yeah, and it's nice that like your fingers get numb outside, right? When you're when you're slapping rocks, so you don't have to, feel everything. If you're feeling all these things at all times, it'd be so distracting. Can you imagine like thinking about the way your teeth feel in your mouth? Now everyone's gonna be thinking about that all day.
I
Uh,
literally,
like,
you said that, I'm like, huh.
huh, how do my teeth feel in my mouth? Exactly. So it's like it's a good thing that we don't have the like literally it's cognitive capacity to like hold all these sensations at one given time in our head. Otherwise we wouldn't be able to climb. We'll just be like so obsessed with being. Um wouldn't it be hard to do it much else actually. So yeah, I was gonna say.
Well, before you jump into that point, then
Mhm.
let's put a bow tie on my
Sure.
sloper component. So I'm at the cognitive stage of using slopers. I need to improve my motor performance and motor learning and
Hmm.
progress into the associative stage by practicing more. And it's possible I could use blocked practice and progress that into random practice, and then I can use internal and external types of feedback to improve it. Did I get a B, C as far as using all the terms from your
You're
article?
you're pretty good. I think there's some that were like there's a sliding scale for the learner, like whether they're the autonomous or they're cognitive autonomous. Or sorry, excuse me, goodness, cognitive associative or autonomous. They're somewhere in this scale, right? And so like you as a
I'm for
learner,
sure cognitive for every single sloper I see.
for every single slipper, yeah. And
I don't
so
know
you
if
kind of
fearfuls are is fearful part of this. Yeah.
well, if you're fearful, you might actually know more about it than most. No, uh,
Ooh, all right.
yeah,
Dang,
so you
yeah.
might be up a little bit up on that learning scale. I think for the most part, you use the terms pretty well, and they're a lot of them are interchangeable. I think like yeah, I think a cognitive learner would do well with a masked practice, we call it, blocked practice or masked practice, like a bunch of it, um, or or like filming themselves on boulders even earlier on. I think that's kind of cool to see how your body like scrambles around something trying to figure it out, and then how much more control or how much just less wasted energy you have between attempts is kind of cool to observe too. um, but that's again a type of external feedback, like a visual feedback or video, but a lot of people are familiar with that. Being climbers, film ourselves and each other all the time on routes.
All right. Well, let's now shift the focus and let's put it on you. What's your
Sure.
and here's the
My
challenge because you have
bane.
all these
Yeah.
terms in the article. We can't use
Hmm.
any of the same ones except for the basic terms, like as far as the
Cognitive,
motor,
associative. Yeah.
cognitive state, associative, autonomous, motor control, motor performance,
Hmm.
motor learning. Those are good, but now we have to use new terms with your challenge. So, what's your
Sure.
challenge?
Yeah, that's a great question.
You're like, I
For
have
me,
none. I love
I have
slopers.
none.
I love
I
compression
love.
moves.
I actually love compression and sloper. I think I
I
might get
know
another
this.
climber. I love
This
it
is why we
so
should be
much.
climbing partners.
Yeah, we should. He's so easy. If I could just, get down to LA more frequently, it should be,
Yeah,
as easy
do you
as
love finger cracks and offwits? Because then we'd be a great
I
team.
I don't. But I honestly don't love crimps right now, which is kind of ironic. I used to be really good at crimps, but I think I was literally just hanging on my connective tissue before I even knew that was a thing. So I feel like for me, the thing is, I can still get psyched up to grab them too. I just don't like to. So I think it's more of like a it's more like a distaste than anything else. Let me figure out a better. Oh, heel hooks. I'm actually terrible. I'm very good at toe hooking. Very strong preference towards toe hooking, but like reeling in with the heel hook is just something that I know I use this example in my article, but it was more like topping a boulder with a heel. But like, man, using a heel to like reel in body tension and to pull my hips around is hard for some reason. Like I can hold it there, but like rocking over, like pulling my hips into the part of the move that's gonna be like in the next move, like adding it in conjunction with things is kind of goofy. Like I can hold it tension fine and slap and do compression all day, but for some reason certain heel hooks, especially high heels, are tricky for me.
Like the concentric component, like where you're locked in, but then you have to like flex a little bit more to make the movement is the challenging part.
I think so. Yeah, I think it's the last bit of it because I feel like I'm on the wall just fine, but I think it really is that whether it's like engaging like the heel hook through the movement to get leverage on it. I just feel like I get the movement. I like pulls my body into the wall, but it doesn't necessarily like give me any sort of. I don't. I feel like I can push off of it, or like people can drive off of it. I feel like I can't do that as easy.
All right. Well, use the terminology. Break down the terminology
Oh yeah,
with your challenge.
yeah. Totally. So for me, I have done a ton of hooks, and so I'm still in that associative phase, I'd call it. So cognitive is like brand new learner. You don't even know what you're doing. You don't know what a heel hook is. Maybe you might have seen it, and then like now that I've like done heel hooks, I've experienced them. I've had success in them. I have failed in them, popped heels all the time, and so for me in my stage of learning, it'll be about getting on good hands. So I have success, in a sense. So I'm like getting on jugs or whatever, or one good foot. And I'm getting into the position where I actually have to like uh, weight myself onto that heel. And I've been kind of forcing myself to do it more. So like, I have better examples. But I'll like get on a sloper problem and I could like say it's a slope or traverse and has a bunch of heel hooks on it and just like snakes up the side of a wall. Like I
Oh,
could
you're just
canvas
rubbing
that
it in
part of the
that you're good
section.
at slopers right now.
Yeah. I just totally am. I had to hype myself up somehow. But
You're like,
I'll
I'm
like I'll get on that
autonomous
route.
on slopers, so let me now work on
Autonomous
my
on slopers.
associative heel hooks. Sorry, keep
Precisely.
going.
Yeah, like no, you're good. No, that's it though. So yeah, it's just kind of it's like for me, it's like okay, I gotta practice this movement. I deliberately place heel hooks. So that's a type of a masked practice. It's not quite blocked. I guess it can be a form of blocked, but I'm basically just using a heel hook every time I can, even if it's not helpful to get familiar of when it is helpful for my body in certain walls or problem types. And so like for me, I go to the gym like overhang stuff pretty good on with heels, but something that doesn't have a solid edge is kind of hard to get leverage on. So like whether it's like a seam between a pancakey kind of hold into the wall or just a sloper outside with a weird seam on the rock, getting my heel on those to get leverage is difficult. So it'd be about like practicing that movement with success with like good hands, good feet at first. Can I even coordinate this movement? And then hopefully I have Jared in the back, who's an expert at heel hooks, and he has his video up, and he's giving me external feedback, and saying, "Hey Joe," or he's giving me concurrent feedback. He's like, "Hey Joe, like twist your now externally rotate your hips a bit, now get your hips closer to the wall, or whatever it might be."
Yeah, I'd be giving you external cues. I'd be like,
yeah.
Squish that fly, in the back of the shoe. I don't know. I'm terrible with external cues, but
yeah, they're hard. Yeah.
Well, hold on. What about like? Okay,
Yeah.
so all right, you're in this position. I'm like yelling out all this beta and cues and spraying with your permission. You're like on these jugs, which you're solid at, but there has to be other types of feedback. I know we talked about internal, external. Can you dive into maybe knowledge of results, knowledge of performance? Because if I'm shouting stuff out, like when do I shout it? When do you internalize it? Kind of break that down.
Totally. Yeah. So knowledge of results and knowledge of performance are essentially ways to describe like what you did is the way I like to outline it. So knowledge of performance is exactly of it's more descriptive, whereas like knowledge of results, let me back up. Knowledge of results is like exactly what you did. It's a result describing the result of your movement. So it's like, did you latch that dyno? Like, was I able to actually successfully mantle with that heel? You'd be like that, and that'd be something that I can see visually myself, like, oh God, I did it. Or I can see, you can say if you're like, oh Joe, you have friction, you can see that making the move. You're like, okay, you can let me know by doing that. You could also do knowledge of performance, which is like more descriptive, saying like, oh, like how, for me, it'd be like how it felt, where this might be one of the few cases where like internal feedback is actually helpful for someone. She's like, was I actually getting friction when I engaged my heel, or was I just like hoping on a hope and a prayer, putting my heel up there and like kind of like trying to create tension or trying to create friction? Like, was I actually able to lock in there? And that'd be something that would internal feedback actually might be helpful for that person. So for those two types of feedback,
yeah, and I think that could come from, as you're mentioning, yourself, and it can also come from someone else. I took a video and we like scrubbed through the video and we see if you effectively, have this knowledge of performance, this description, and I could be using cues as a coach, or you can be internalizing them as well. But what about, so that's knowledge of results, knowledge of performance. What about concurrent and summative feedback?
Yeah, so concurrent, I kind of mentioned this in a joke, but spraying someone down is like concurrent in the gym. If you're going to give someone, they should actually be really funny. It'd be funny if they'd be like, I've seen the beta spray bottles. It'd be funny if there's like concurrent feedback shirts people are making, about being up on the wall.
I hate concurrent feedback. It's like, or I do not like it. I don't want to use harsh terms, but
harsh terms. Yeah. Is it, what about it do you not like?
I don't like concurrent external feedback from, I feel like the challenge for me climbing is me providing my own concurrent feedback, in my brain. And that's like the fun part. It's almost like, someone's giving like the beta spray components is someone's giving answers. Now that's a lot different if I'm like run out outside and I like really need help, or I'm going to like, take a big whipper. But like in the climbing gym, I'm like, I like quiet. And then my mind goes through all the self type of feedback.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah. So like, even in that interaction, like I learned a lot about you as a climber, right? And so like there's it's I don't know, it's helpful to get these little snippets of people, to figure out like, okay, what makes them tick as a climber? What's going to motivate them? And are they already busy cognitively while they're climbing? Like that's a huge component into feedback, because your brain is making sense of all of these sensations that I was talking about earlier, like, and keeping track of them so they aren't conscious in your head of being like, oh man, this feels bad, this cramp's terrible, my hands are sweaty, I'm slipping, I'm out of breath, I'm hungry, I'm tired, I'm sunburned, whatever it might be, right? Yeah. I have to pee. Yeah, I have to poop my pants. I might poop my pants. If you're up there, just really, really going through it.
Yeah, and so it's like, I don't want more feedback from others. That makes sense. And I like how you're able to, like, from the coaching mindset, you're able to say, oh, I can identify how this person likes feedback, because for example, for mine, you're probably like, oh, because I need to find a way to get him to do slopers and to have, in the early stage successes with feedback. So he keeps doing his, different types of practice. Um,
Mhm.
but I want to go back to your case. We've got your heel hook. You're trying to get better at this heel hook. I think we've almost hit all the terms in the article, but I don't know if we've
Sure.
gone through. Oh, sorry. Go for it.
Oh no, you're. I think just some audio popped out. You say
Oh,
you're going to talk about bandwidth.
no, yeah. No, I think you've hit all the terms in the article except guided versus discovery and error
Oh
versus
yeah.
errorless.
Sure. Yeah, yeah, we can chat about those. So, in the article, I use an example with a foot. So it's like learning how to place feet. We'll talk about error and errorless first. So error or error-driven learning is only used when someone's kind of in that middle stage of learning, like the the associative. I'm gonna get this right by the end of the podcast. That middle ground where they're aware of what they're doing. They're trying to really refine their movement, and so certain folks, even folks with stroke or with certain types of cerebellar ataxia, certain type of ataxic patients can actually use this as a way to make their gait better, their walking better in the PT world. And so you can like get a TheraBand on them and pull their legs out from like the treadmill while they're trying to walk straight, and you augment essentially their steps and you're providing errors to their steps. So when you take away the external feedback, it's like, oh man, this thing used to be a lot, harder to place accurately, and now I can place it because my body's paying more attention to it. Because you've given the body that stimulus via force to pay attention to something's moving. Or that's like you telling them, hey, look at your foot, and then you're pulling on them. So an example I use in the article is someone with an ankle weight on and they're trying to use bad feet or small feet or something, and they're every time they place their foot on something their toe pops because they're not accurate. And so you could use an ankle weight for someone and give them an error driven type of learning in that scenario, so they're like all over the place. I don't know if it'd be the best practice of it. I think it'd be kind of goofy, but
It's
it at least
creative.
like lets you, yeah, at least lets you think of it, right? It's like the idea is to get you thinking. It's not saying, okay, like go out and try ankle weights on your legs, unless like you really believe that's going to be useful for you.
or like
But
or like you're doing your heel hook and you attach like a TheraBand to your leg and you're like trying to heel hook and
Yeah,
your coach
something
is like
goofy, or like my hips, you're
yanking
pulling me
your
off the
leg
wall.
away. Yeah.
Yeah, that's not it. That's not it. But that's ways to augment what you're doing, right, from an external source. So error-driven learning is just that. It's like you're causing something to stop them from performing it successfully, so their body has to overcorrect. And then I think honestly paying a little more cognitive attention to it. And then when you take that stimulus away, it becomes a lot easier to do stuff successfully. So in the ankle weight scenario is like the idea is like now you don't have to like fight the weight of this thing. Placing your toe should be a lot easier than it will be with this thing on, making your foot feel kind of like you stepped in a bunch of mud, or whatever, and you got like a bunch of weight on your legs. And then error-less learning is kind of like when you don't have any errors at all. So it's almost like ignorance is bliss is a good way to describe it. So if I jug up to a section I'm working on in a crux and I don't have the fatigue of the rest of the bolts or whatever, and I'm there just to work that red point crux, I can get that red point crux done, and I can have an error-free experience by just sending that section of the route. That way, like my body's like, okay, like this is how I do it. This is how I'm gonna like reserve economy. And then you can even go there in a fatigue state, right, later on to add on to that session and say, okay, now that I have fatigue in my system and maybe a pump, can I execute these moves the same way? And so that'd be a step ahead. But another form of errorless learning too is actually early on. So error-less learning you can use with an early learner, like someone in the cognitive stage, like Jared on slopers. You could just let Jared paw on slopers all day long, and whether he's being successful on them or not, like it's a way for him to make sense of what he's doing and his body to make sense of what he's doing, and whether or not he feels successful, in that scenario. So it's and some learners might benefit from that. Some learners might be dismal with that. Like one learner might be like, oh, they're killing it. They're a natural. They're really good at just figuring something out. And if you just let them be, they will figure it out. Whereas someone's like, they need a lot of hands-on help, at least in the beginning, to like figure out like, how do I even do this? Like, how do I get on? What do I do with this thing? When you just
Yeah.
want to
I
slow over
think
for the first time.
Yeah, I think I would need some type of like reward. Like you
Yeah,
give me like
like
30
gummy
minutes
bears.
only. Yeah, give me some gummy. That's too sweet. I don't
Nah,
know.
too
Give
sweet.
me a protein
Salted
shake for
popcorn. There you go. Okay.
yeah, something like that. All right, what about guided versus discovery? I think that's the final term from the article.
Yeah, yeah, totally. Discovery we kind of used earlier a little bit. So
True.
self-discovery is like you figuring it out by yourself. So it's you trying to figure out um, uh, what are my tools that I have at my disposal to get this task at hand, and then you start investigating, and you're like getting in the position of trying the heel hook, or in Jared's situation, getting in position to try the sloper. You kind of like fumbling around. You're playing with body positioning and arm length. And then, whereas, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought there. We're talking about
A guided
uh,
versus discovery. So
guided versus discovery. Yeah, whereas guided is very much more hands-on. It's kind of actually what we just chatted about. Like,
I think we already talked
uh,
about that then.
yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think we just chatted about that. I think there was the last one was it bandwidth feedback? It's the last one we didn't chat
Oh,
about.
because I guess that's a component of the
hmm
concurrent versus summative.
Bandwidth essentially is a marked time or like space and time where you're going to give feedback. And so I like the idea that I like the idea of existing like with a window and an interval. So it's like you're going to offer their feedback based on like time passed. So it's been like 30 seconds or 45 seconds, and you're like, okay, now I can give feedback to Jared because like this is where he typically would I don't know, scream or something, and like he's not giving me anything, so I need to like check in on him or something. Or it could be poor movement. It's like, okay, now Jared has done like X, Y, and Z wrong um, X amount of times. Okay, like now it's time to give feedback. So say it's like placing your feet, like go back to that person trying to get their feet to be more precise. It's like, okay, every time they place it wrong or like ugly on the hold, then like I'm gonna keep track of that, and I'm going to offer feedback when they hit X amount of bad feet. That could be a type of feedback, or it could be in a part of a route. It can be even like a space and time. You're like, okay, I'm gonna give feedback only in this route, and then I'm gonna shut up. I'm gonna root Jared on for just this like run out terrible top portion, and I'm gonna stay silent to the rest of it because he has to be dialed. And so those are two examples I can think of, at least with that application.
Nice. I think we nailed all the terms. Is there anything else from the article or applications that you wanted to go over?
Um, Not a whole lot. I think what I really wanted to drive home is that like I'm not an expert in this field at all. There's a ton of wonderful people who have gone before me that have done a lot of cool work in movement science. And I owe it to them, I think. And there's a lot of other folks too in the climbing world specifically that are looking at movement that I admire, and that I receive a lot of good, not just feedback, but just good mentorship. Not even mentorship, I'd call it, but just information from. I feel like that. Not the expert in the room. A lot of people have gone before me in this. Two, everyone's an individual, so whether you might like type of practice, a type of feedback, someone might not. It's important to ask if you're going to be a good partner to somebody. Like, hey, how can I encourage you? Do you like verbal encouragement? Do you not like verbal encouragement? As a coach, understand your athletes and what makes them tick and what makes them stoked about something and what really defeats them, and try to support them as you can as that coach. I think getting to know your athlete, and as a provider, it's like getting to know your client is so important. So I think if you can get to know your athlete, your coach, your client, whatever it might be that you're in front of you, and figure out what their needs are, their weaknesses, and then allow for them space to process this as you go along with them, because you might be 2 or 3 or 4 steps ahead of them in figuring out like, oh, this is what they need. But them figuring that piece out might be the biggest thing for their learning, and the biggest thing that separates them from being autonomous to associative. And so make sure that you give those people space to process, because processing is huge when it comes to motor learning and motor control. Like if they fall they're going on a flash attempt, or it's their fifth or sixth try on a project, and they come down, like give them a second and let them think about it. And they might like the banter back and forth, like it's up to you to know that with your partner. And it makes us better climbers, makes us better providers, makes us better coaches. I think there's some hidden low hanging fruit in motor control and motor learning. And I think that if folks looked at it in this light, they could actually be like, oh, I can like separate this skill out into like learnable stages for people, or I can separate this type of climbing out into learnable stages for people. Because we're doing this already without even calling it motor control and motor learning. So I think if organizing it, if it's helpful for you, great. If it's not fun to assign terms and climbing's just climbing, then great. Let climbing be great. But hopefully this has been helpful to people as far as just opening your eyes to what motor learning, motor control, motor performance is in the context of climbing, and then how you or someone else could benefit from this knowledge,
Yeah, and I think like both of us probably have benefited from this discussion as well, because I'm going to have to go in and do a little sloper practice. You've got some heel hook practice, and I think
I
those
do.
listening have some concepts and ideas they can work on as well. So Joe, where can people find you if they want to get in touch?
Totally. Yeah. You can go onto my website at dissonance.com or dissonancept.com. I actually have my sweatshirt here, so I'll pan down for that.
Yeah, those of
Right
you
there.
watching, we got a nice logo sweatshirt going.
Yeah. So they can find me at dissonancept.com. I'm here in Central Oregon in Bend. I am out of Bend Endurance Academy as a brick and mortar, but I can meet at any gym in town too. So if people want local or PT in house, they can get it from me here, or just want to chat more about this stuff. Like I'm kind of a nerd about this, and I'd love to talk to anybody interested in movement science and movement and climbing, because I think it's a cool field.
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming on, and I'll link all that information in the show note. And yeah, I think next time we meet up, we'll find some finger crack off widths with some heel hooks and slopers on a multi-pitch route that we can swap some leads on. Does that work?
Yeah, it sounds like a terrible day.
All right. Take care, Joe.
See you later. Thanks.